Welcome to the CRC Roundtable, our monthly virtual seminar series. If you've been here before, you know that these webinars are designed for contribution, not consumption. And as a reflection of that intent, the panelists have been given about 25 minutes total to make some introductory remarks, allowing 30 minutes for discussion. That is facilitated out of the chat and from some questions that have been submitted in advance. This is all about us, giving us a place to ask clumsy questions and to practice the bravery and humility necessary for going about our work. Let me start, as we always do, by understanding why this topic at this time by these speakers. At its core, the 2014 Bay Watershed Agreement recognizes that the Bay watershed is an assembly of streams, rivers, and watersheds, and that the active support of citizens and local government decision makers, particularly local elected officials, is key to achieving the vision of that agreement. As we approach the TMDL 2025 target date, we've come to understand that there are multiple lagging outcomes, and in response, jurisdictions are doubling down on their efforts to accelerate progress, and large investments are being made. But if we've learned two things in the past 30 years that bear repeating, it's that when it comes to what to do, it is not one size fits all. And two, that serving a goal that is far away and not directly related to one's own community provides little motivation. Environmental protection and watershed restoration are longer-term efforts that are actually often seen to be in conflict with local priorities. But in fact, there are many examples where local priorities intersect with the goals of the Bay Watershed Agreement. The challenge, therefore, is to identify those intersections and effectively communicate the opportunities that exist to build public support for actions that address both at the same time. So how do we provide our municipal officials the tools they need to do just that? Luckily, we have the Chesapeake Bay Local Government Advisory Committee, which was created by the Executive Council in 1987. And the purpose of LGAC, as we lovingly refer to them, is to advise the Executive Council on how to effectively implement projects and engage the support of local governments to achieve the goals of the Bay Agreement. In 2019, LGAC and the Local Leadership Workgroup began work on a suite of learning materials that frame the Chesapeake Bay Program's goals through the lenses of economic development, public health and safety, transportation and infrastructure, climate change, and education. And a second phase of the work culminated in an online learning library that we'll hear about today. We have with us we have with us two panelists who can not only describe these resources, but have hands-on experience implementing them, and collectively have had the responsibility of motivating and mobilizing hundreds, literally thousands of people across numerous sectors in environmental action. Laura Cattell-Knowles serves as the LGAC coordinator. She's mobilized over 1,000 volunteers and 4,000 students in watershed restoration projects for the National Aquarium. She says that people always ask her how it is working with the dolphins, but she can't answer that question because she worked with the people, not the dolphins. But they did watershed restoration projects for the National Aquarium. She's also had to supervise teams of undergraduate researchers. Shannon Moore has shepherded energy and environment programs in the Maryland state and local government sectors for over 20 years, including Frederick County's energy portfolio and its renewable portfolio requirements, alternative vehicles program, climate and energy plans, and building resilience. So with that, I will let our speakers take the floor. Remind you that we will facilitate the discussion out of the chat when they're done. Each of them could give an hour by themselves, but we'd allow them about 25 minutes total to make their remarks so that we have enough time for discussion. And with that, I'll turn the floor over to Laura.
Thank you, Denise, and thanks all for having us. It's been a long time since my National Aquarium days, so excited to be talking about local governments today. Again, my name is Laura Cattell-Knowles, and I work at the Alliance for the Chesapeake Bay and coordinate the work of the Local Government Advisory Committee. And Shannon, I think, is going to get us started, but I will share our screen so that you all can see the slides we prepared.
right, and thank you everyone for being here today. So we're going to talk about our Protect Local Waterways initiative, which was a joint project of the Local Government Advisory Committee and the Local Leadership Workgroup of the Bay Program. And the first question that we really had to answer is, why did we do this Protect Local Waterways thing? And I'll just give you a little bit of a story. So several years ago, the Local Leadership Workgroup hosted a meeting in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. And one of the council members from the borough spoke to us. He was a local business owner, and he had gotten into local government to support Main Street revitalization efforts. But then once he was there, he quickly learned that stormwater was a huge portion of the job, including revitalization. And in the local leadership work group meeting, he highlighted the need for a handbook for newly elected officials to quickly get them up to speed on watershed issues. And actually, that's true for elected officials all over the Bay Area, where we have people coming in who may or may not have experience with understanding the Bay. And suddenly they are part of a world where this is important, and there's regulatory issues to meet, there's financial considerations, there's tie-ins with other issues like agriculture and climate change and equity, and it can be kind of mystifying for them. And we want to make sure that people are aware of the priorities that are out there, and also that we're giving them the tools to understand how they can act in a way that is best for their local governments and their local waterways, which is why we called it Protect Local Waterways. But that also adds up to something bigger in the restoration of the Chesapeake Bay. So how did we get here? So the first thing that we did in 2014 was have the local leadership outcome added to the watershed agreement that's part of the Bay program. And then in 2015, we did focus groups with local officials. And those local officials, by the way, are connected through not only individual organizations, but also their affiliated groups. And so we work very closely with not only elected officials kind of individually, but also their entire networks. For example, Maryland Association of Counties being one of the networks. In 2017, a contractor recommended that we put this educational material together specifically for local officials, knowing that they're the ones that are leveraging resources and having to make big decisions about what's happening in the Bay Area. And then in 2020, we hired Greenfin to work on the modules. And just as a note, in 2015 and 17, the independent contractors that evaluated the local officials' current knowledge and capacity also inventoried existing educational capacity building opportunities, and they identified gaps that the Bay program could help fill. So this educational content with the 101 watershed knowledge was highlighted as a major gap. So it's not like there's all this stuff out there and we're just, we're creating something on top of all of that. We actually did an evaluation to make sure that we were addressing a real need. And then in 2021, after launching the educational materials, we also realized very quickly that we needed a website to house the materials. And so in 2022, Greenfin began to work on additional content because the other thing that happened is once we put the original materials out, people said, well, but what about a topic of this? What about a topic of that? And so that was really great because we got feedback from the elected officials on what it was that they wanted to see, and we were responsive to that. So in 22, the Bay Program web team began to work on a new website, and in 2023, the website launches. And I was the chair of the local leadership work group for part of that. In addition to doing all my energy stuff, I have a pretty strong stormwater component as well. And so this stuff is near and dear to my heart. Okay, next slide. And that is Laura.
Yeah, thanks, Shannon, for that that background and kind of that why. So again, we know that local officials, make decisions every day that impact not just their local community, but the watersheds in their community and all of the communities within the greater Chesapeake Bay watershed. So helping to, this Protect Local Waterways website and the, local government guide resources are all about helping local officials kind of understand how those actions can have an impact and help them understand how they can take action to protect their local waterways while also advancing their other priorities, things like economic development, public health, safety, infrastructure. Those are topics that local officials are thinking about and talking about every day. So we want to help them understand how some of these actions can advance those priorities while also helping to protect their local waterways. So we're going to share the website in a minute. I'm going to do a little demo. but just kind of want to give you a brief overview of what to expect. So on the Protect Local Waterways website, we have a learning library, which has modules. So these are 11 different topic areas, and each module is a short video, about a 2-minute video that you could show to an elected official, that our partners can share on social media. That's just sort of summarizes how that topic area is relevant to them and important to their community. Then we also have a 2-page fact sheet that summarizes the information if you ever wanted a handout for a conference panel, for example, or a tabling and want a handout for that. That's what those fact sheets are really great for. And then we have a full about 30 slide deck module presentation for each of these 11 modules within the learning library. And those are downloadable. You can download them as a PowerPoint. They are non-branded materials, so you can put your own organizational branding on them. We're going to talk a little bit about how Delaware did that in a minute, but that's just an example of how you can make the materials relevant to the folks in your community. And they're fully editable, so you can change the photos, you can change the case studies, you can just pull out one slide. And we also have the infographics that were created as part of these materials available for download as well. So these are highly editable materials, highly customizable, no one size fits all for local government. So we want to make sure that you and others who are using these materials have full range to edit them and tailor them as needed. We have 4 icons that are featured throughout the materials, and these are to highlight the connections with those local government priorities. So, where there's a connection with economic development, where there's a connection with infrastructure maintenance and financing, education, and public health and safety, we have these icons to help identify that as part of the materials. So again, each of these modules is the video, handouts, and a 30 slide deck PowerPoint that can be edited. So I'm going to really briefly go through the 11 topics that are covered by those modules, but 2 topics you won't see are diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice, and climate. And that's because we decided that those are such cross-cutting issues, we didn't want to silo them in a separate module. So all 11 of these have a call out that are related to DEIJ or climate to help local officials understand that those 2 topic areas are connected to all of these features. So again, I'm going to demo the website in a minute, and that's way more interesting than these 11 topic areas, but I do want to quickly preview what they are for you. So these first 2 are really the sort of key foundational sets of materials. The first is how your watershed works. That's Watershed 101. What is a watershed? What's the water cycle? The second is foundations of clean water. These are basics around what is the Clean Water Act? What is the Chesapeake Bay Program? What does TMDL stand for? These are basic questions, but if you're a local elected official who has no background in this and is suddenly asked to make decisions around it, these 2 are really key, really foundational for you to be a true partner in this work. All right, so the next are all topical modules. We have one, Clean Water for the Economy, is all about what's the economic value of clean water for my community. One about capitalizing on the benefits of trees and how do you sort of create those benefits in your community. That's a fairly popular one. Next is preserving local character and landscapes. It's all about land use. Where are we developing? Where are we choosing land preservation, land conservation? That's another really popular module. It's got some great tools, planning tools, and resources in that one. Number 6, protecting community infrastructure through stormwater resilience. I think this is our absolute top most used module. Stormwater is a major issue for local governments, and this kind of goes through all the basics. What does MS4 stand for? Why do I have to have an MS4 permit in my community? And then, what's required to meet some of those obligations. Number 7, building the workforce of today and tomorrow. That's all about workforce development. Jobs are a big issue for local governments. The green job sector is a great opportunity to build high-skilled, good-paying jobs in our communities. So what can a local government do to sort of foster that sector? Module 9, preparing your community for water extremes. Flooding is a huge issue for many local governments, and not just stormwater flooding, but coastal flooding. And so we have a whole separate module about how flooding impacts communities, the economic impacts of that, and what local governments can do to mitigate those impacts in their community. Module 9, Shannon mentioned when we did the first round, we had some folks say, why don't you have a module on X, Y, and Z topics? So when we launched the first set, the number 1 feedback we got is, why don't you have one on agriculture? So we added a module on agriculture. understanding and supporting your agricultural allies. So what is the local government's role in helping the farmers in their community and helping them, sort of rise to this moment around watershed restoration? And there's some really great case studies in that module. Module 10 is keys to engaging your community on sustainability. This is all about how important community engagement is in this process, so that members of your community, know when a BMP is going to be installed, for example, or they understand why a stream restoration project is going underway. And then the last one, module 11, your health and the environment. There are, many emerging contaminants. PFAS is a huge issue, PCBs, lead, and how those public health concerns are related to our watershed work, and how to sort of understand what those connections are. So that was really quick, going through those 11 topics. It's way more interesting and engaging on the website. So I think I'm gonna pop over there now. Give me just one moment. Okay, so here we are. This is the Protect Local Waterways website. And maybe Lauren could do me a favor and put a link in the chat in case anyone wants to, explore on their own. At the top here, we have one of these short videos. This is just an overview on how watershed work, watershed priorities can advance economic development, public health and safety, education, and infrastructure, maintenance, and finance. Those 4 sort of core areas of local government priorities that we've identified. So a short video here. And then, here are these icons again that I showed you, so that folks, remember these, and as they're looking through the materials can see them. And then what can you do on the website? You can use our learning library to achieve those beneficial outcomes for your community. You can also review the case studies, all the case studies that are in the PowerPoint slides we have added to the website. So you don't need to download the PowerPoint slides. You can directly see those case studies. Those are super important for local governments to understand that other local governments are doing this, and it might be possible for them to replicate it in their community. And then, of course, you can download those presentations, fact sheets, and infographics. As I mentioned, these materials can be tailored, edited, used for however you are engaging local officials within your community. We want this to be a resource that's helping you as you're doing that work. So you can download those materials right from this website. And then, of course, find solutions, find those ideas that can generate solutions for your community. We also have a spotlight, so we can change out what the, which particular module we're highlighting. And then, of course, some reviews from some of our great users of the materials. So scrolling back up to the top, the learning library, this is where all the action is. Here are all those 11 topic areas I just went through. I mentioned how popular the stormwater is. So I'm going to click view details to open protecting your infrastructure through stormwater resilience. So as I mentioned, there's a short video for each of these. It's just like 1 or 2 minutes long. That's going to help local officials kind of really quickly understand what the issue is and how it's relevant to them. We've seen this used on social media. They can be embedded in email, lots of ways that people can use this. Then scrolling down in this topic, kind of what you'll learn. You'll learn what is stormwater and how it's dangerous to my community. What can I do to mitigate flood-related damages, and how will future climate conditions impact infrastructure? So 3 key points that you're going to learn from the resources on this page. So these highlights just sort of, highlighting for folks how stormwater and these priorities are aligned. I mentioned the case studies. So down here, you can see some case studies. We have case studies from Virginia, New York, Maryland, and folks can click through and find the case study that's most relevant to them and to their community. And then lastly, here's how you can help. So what's sort of the call to action here at the end? So, meet with your MS4 coordinator or stormwater engineer, build flexibility and adaptability into your infrastructure plans, and then protect and restore valuable wetlands and other natural landscapes. So these are, exactly what you can do around stormwater in your community. And then we have where can you go to learn more? So for example, the MOST Center, the Municipal Online Stormwater Training Center, is a really deep dive in stormwater. So this is a 101 level, what is stormwater? And if you want to go deeper, we have those resources here for you or for a local government staff that wants to do more of a deep dive. And then scrolling back up, right here along presentations and fact sheets, this is where you download the presentation as a PowerPoint. Again, download it, edit it, use a slide, use 2 slides, whatever is going to help you meet the needs of your local government. And then, so the fact sheets are available here, and the presentation assets or the infographics are also available for download. I'll highlight here on the right-hand side, you can navigate to different modules. If you think, oh, okay, now I want to go over to preserving local character and landscapes, you can just click that to quickly go over to that module topic. And then lastly, I want to flag at the top, we have a glossary as well. That is hugely popular because there's so many terms, there's so much jargon that we use, and to have some key terms kind of quickly defined is really important. So one I get a lot is, what does TMDL stand for again? So if you go over here to the right, you can jump to a letter, click on T, and then there you go, total maximum daily load. So that's a great resource for local officials who, heard a word and need to be reminded what it stands for. Okay, back to my presentation. And I think I'm turning it back over to you, Shannon, but hopefully you all got the link to the website in the chat, and please explore it at your leisure.
Thanks, Laura. And just the other day we had a staff meeting, and we challenged ourselves to make entire sentences out of acronyms. We had a lot of fun with that. I don't want to tell you how many we were able to string together, but it was a lot. So how are these materials being used? Well, first of all, I just want to shout out to Laura, who put a lot of these materials into play with the various organizations that we work with and was instrumental in the success of this. So thank you very much for that, Laura. So some of the ways in which that these have been used are conference panel handouts, particularly with our affiliated organizations that are working with multiple different local governments. Has been especially valuable. Webinar presentation slides, of course, like today. Email series with links to the PDFs. We're going to tell a case study about that here in a minute. Magazine and blog articles, professional development coursework, newly elected official trainings, which we'll also talk about, and then tabling materials. So some of the case studies that we have are, for example, Delaware, the state tailored the relevant case studies and pictures and shared them monthly via email as a handbook, and partnered with the town managers as key trusted sources of information for elected officials. And they had a 50 to 60% open rate over this series, which we just thought was terrific. And so it shows how that trusted source was able to disseminate information to people who could actually use it, and that they did actually use it. I also have given some presentations to the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments, and others have as well. And that is an organization comprised of elected officials. A lot of times we get newly elected officials on the Chesapeake Bay Policy Committee, for example, and these issues are all new to them. So how do you get them up to speed and help them to be able to help their communities and the region as a whole? We gave orientation on these materials, and we focused particularly on how your watershed works, foundations of clean water, and understanding and supporting your agricultural allies as examples. Next slide. So our impact to date is we've had 2,000 plus unique viewers on the website and 6,000 plus page views. We've had 300 plus file downloads and 250 plus case study clicks. Keep in mind that these materials have not been online for that long yet, so we're really excited about that. And the materials have been used in Delaware, Maryland, New York, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and Virginia. These materials have reached an estimated 3,000 plus local government officials and staff between the direct downloads and some of the work that people have done to share the materials, like in the case studies that we provided. So we estimate that about 20,000 plus people have had indirect exposure to these, with about 1,000 actually interacted with the material and 2,000 directly engaging with the materials. Now turning it back over to Superstar Laura.
Thanks, Shannon. So kind of the question we have for you all is, how could these materials help you? How could they help you advance your goals with engaging with the local officials in your area? There are 1,900 local governments in the Chesapeake Bay watershed. And so Shannon and I can't be going door to door. We want to help support you all as you're doing this work in your community. So I hope as you're checking out the website and as we're having this conversation today, you're already starting to think through about which of these materials would be useful to you, which you could share with local officials in your area, which materials you could download, again, brand with your organization, tailor to your audiences, and again, advance your goals within your local community. Lastly, I have to do a big shout out to all the folks that participated in creating these materials. We had a ton of folks review the content, help create the website. Huge shout out specifically to Greenfin Studios and the Chesapeake Bay Program web team, which is housed out of UMC's. Wonderful, wonderful work on both those teams to create the materials. And then, thanks to all these folks who helped review them. All the names in bold are local government staff, local elected officials, or are part of a local government association. So though that local voice was central to creating these materials and bringing this message forward. And that's all we have. So thank you, Denise. We did a good job keeping to our 24 minutes or whatever we had.
You win the award for most disciplined panel in 4 years, most disciplined panel. So just to remind people, we do have a list of questions submitted in advance, but we love taking them out of the chat. So start putting your questions in the chat and I will pull some out. Just a reminder, if we don't get to either a question that's been submitted in the chat or one that was submitted in advance, we do follow up with our panelists and ask them to try and answer every question that's been asked, and we send out those responses and a link to the recording to everyone who registered. So if we don't get to your question, don't despair. We try to address everything. And so with that, I think I'll start out because I think you covered it in your PowerPoint and sort of in some of your remarks, but it might not have been really clear. So one of the questions we got in advance was, how were local officials engaged and involved in the development of the materials? Was it just a survey in the beginning, or I think you mentioned feedback and how you are going to continue to engage them as you refine and add? So I'll ask both of you to offer those remarks. And I don't know, Laura, you're nodding your head the most vigorously, so I'll make you first and Shannon can follow up.
Okay, well, I'll nod less vigorously next time. Yeah, so as Shannon mentioned, back in 2015 and 2017, there were 2 independent contractor projects that conducted interviews and focus groups with local officials. And that's what really identified this need for these 101 level resources. So from the very beginning, we heard this was a need from our audience. So that's number 1. Number 2, throughout the development of the materials, we had folks review the content. Is this a topic you would be interested in hearing about? Does this messaging resonate with you? When we work through both the local leadership work group and the local government advisory committee, as well as our partners with the municipal leagues and the county associations to do that work. And then I'll say as well, the Chesapeake Bay Program web team does a fantastic job. They have a really comprehensive approach to developing a web product, and it includes multiple steps of user research. So they did 2 or 3 pieces of user research, testing out the tool in like a beta version and testing out the website in the final version. So I think they had 3 stages of feedback during the actual creation of the website process. Shannon, do you have more you want to add?
Yeah, we might want to bring up the survey that we did of the local government elected officials, because that was something that we had as part of our requirement for the Bay program, but it was also something that we used to inform the development of these materials.
Sure. So I think many of you know, but local leadership is one of the outcomes in the watershed agreement. It was added in 2014. And so as part of that, we created an indicator, which is one of the frameworks that the Bay program has for evaluating our success and our progress toward meeting the outcome. So we did a survey in 2022 and then launched an indicator after that, again, trying to understand what is the knowledge and capacity of local officials and are we making progress towards increasing that knowledge and capacity? But yeah, Shannon, that was a long survey and included lots of questions that helped us understand what topics local officials wanted to see.
What, if I can ask you, what is the outcome, and what metrics do you use to know what sort of impact the materials are having?
So the local leadership outcome, I can put the text in the chat here, is continually increase the knowledge and capacity of local officials on issues related to water resources, and all with the goal of implementation of those local conservation actions. So that's the local leadership outcome as it's written in the watershed agreement. On Chesapeake Progress, I can put a link here in the chat. You can see how we are sort of measuring that progress. We have a few indicators, 3 that are getting at, again, what's the knowledge of local officials, and then that last step, what's sort of the actual implementation of local conservation actions.
Great. Okay, let me, this is another question that was asked in advance. And while you were very disciplined, if people don't start putting questions in the chat, you're going to be the quietest webinar audience ever. So you don't want that. There was a really good question about, are there particular groups of local officials that need this information more than others? And
I don't know if I would say more than others. I would say that the way that we work with elected officials is often through these groups, and that they've all been really essential in terms of being able to help us to determine the needs of the local officials and to disseminate it. And so in Maryland, for example, we have the Maryland Municipal League, we have the Maryland Association of Counties, we have a number of other organizations regionally, like the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments. I wouldn't say that any one of them is more important than the other. They each have different outreach methodologies, modalities. And so for us, it's a matter of finding out from these organizations what they're trying to do, because they're always trying to provide good content for elected officials to be able to help them with whatever tasks the local officials have, and to show the value of the organization in helping to meet that. And so really, it's a whole strategy of working with these affiliated networks that's been really valuable to us. And I know Laura may have some specifics on the organizations she's worked with, but the ability to do conference sessions, the ability to do webinars, the ability to have this material in emails. Each one of those organizations has a different suite of tools that it uses, and it can take advantage of the tools that we've provided in different ways.
Yeah, I'll add that the local leadership survey, one of the things it found is that the knowledge and capacity gaps are highest for local officials from the smallest communities and newly elected officials. So that is something we see across the board, across the watershed, that those newly elected officials really have the highest need, and then from the smallest communities. So that's where we as a work group have tried to focus our efforts, but we work throughout the watershed, and we don't really have a geographic focus or priority.
Well, that leads me to ask, did you see any geographical differences in who
We didn't in the local leadership survey. We, evaluated sort of some 101 level knowledge around watershed. What is a watershed? Some basic questions like that. And we did not find any differences from different states. So the understanding of what a watershed is pretty consistent, whether you're in Maryland or Pennsylvania or Virginia. But it's, again, those newly elected officials and those from the smallest communities that need the most support.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay, Melissa Chatham asked, how long did it take to put this site together?
Overall, it was about 3 years, Laura, is that right? From start to finish, between kind of conceiving of the idea and putting the kind of the draft plans together to launching it on the website and enhancing the material on the website.
Yeah, that's about right.
Yeah, and then Larry Sanford asked a follow-up question, which was, how is the effort funded, and are there ongoing funds for maintenance and upgrades?
The creation of the materials and the website was funded by the Chesapeake Bay Program through Goal Implementation Team funding, or GIT funding. In terms of ongoing maintenance, the Chesapeake Bay Program web team is committed to doing the sort of website maintenance part of it. And then there is like a content management system behind the scenes so that myself and other staff can update those materials and resources as needed.
People are asking great follow-up questions in the chat. So Eric Kaufman is asking, well, what is the plan for updating it to meet changing needs and emerging information or priorities?
I'm sure that'll be necessary down the line. But again, this is 101 level material, right? The definition of watershed isn't going to change. What TMDL stands for isn't going to change. So there will be opportunities to update it down the line, but most of the content is at a basic level that we're in my, I guess my personal view, maybe Shannon, you can disagree with me, doesn't need to be updated, you know, on a yearly basis, for example. It's not really cutting edge information that we're sharing.
Yeah, I'd say a triennial review is probably a good idea.
Okay, thank you. What's your biggest challenge to getting folks to access the resources? You've had a lot
That's a
of
good question. So the first thing is that people don't always know what they don't know. And so when they get into local government, they may not initially know that they need to know anything about stormwater, for example. And then when the issue comes up, it may come up at a time where they don't know what resources are out there. So we're trying to hit people early on in their elected phase to make sure that they're aware of the fact that these issues exist and that there's materials out there to help them. Because by the time they have a question, it can be a little bit late. So that's one thing. Some people are going to be put on a committee for their local, you know, as a local elected officials. Okay, well, you're on the COG, Chesapeake Bay Program Committee, and therefore you're going to go to these meetings. And then for them, it's a matter of them getting that orientation when they first start with some of these different kinds of materials. But some people, like what Laura's talking about, maybe out in you know, in more remote areas, smaller local government, and so reaching them through affiliated communities early is going to be key. So it's different for different people depending on what their roles are, but the idea is to try to get them early and often.
Well, and how do you even find your way to them? Through some of these groups that you alluded to, Shannon, or through LGAC? I mean, how do you find them to notify them early?
Well, everyone's connected to different networks. So that's the first thing that we learned, is that, you know, this one person may be really familiar with the municipal league, and this other person may be more connected to the Bay program through LGAC. And so having those different affiliated communities out there reaching out to them, or through the Division of Environmental Protection for the state, for example, so that because those people are also, maybe they're a permit holder, and making sure that the staff that are associated with that permit get that kind of information. So it can be used in a lot of different ways depending on exactly where you are in that audience group. There is no one answer to that question. I wish there were, because then it would be a lot easier to do our work. And Laura, maybe you have something to add to that.
No, I'll just highlight, Shannon, your focus on networks. There's networks of local elected officials, there's networks of stormwater folks, there's networks of local government planners, there's conservation district networks. And so that's the approach we've taken. We can't be going, Shannon and I can't be going door to door, right? There's too many local governments. So partnering with those networks and sharing these resources with them, and then they get to implement it within their communities. That's what we found to be successful.
Have you found that peer-to-peer is as important as it is, for example, in the agricultural sector between farmers, that peer-to-peer between local government officials is important as well, or particularly important or effective?
Yes, and I think the most, first of all, the most popular activities that we have done involve peer-to-peer networking. So that's one. So when we do the tours on the Chesapeake Bay, that consistently is the highest rated activity that we do as far as people feeling like they've really learned something and they've connected to this material. So that's really important to us. And then the other thing about peer-to-peer learning is that, each one teach one really does work, particularly if you're one person in an organization and you're trying to talk to your colleagues. Then you have all of this information behind you as opposed to just trying to tell somebody about something that you learned and you don't have any background on.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And I think that also answers another question that was in here from Olivia, which was, other than direct questions in the work group, how is the material shared with government officials in a way that they find receptive? So it sounds as if you do a lot of outreach, and then there's the peer-to-peer. Anything to add to that?
Laura, you've done a tremendous amount of outreach with this. I'm wondering if you have any specific thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I really have to shout out to our partners at the municipal leagues and the county associations. You know, they are the ones, their whole mission is about supporting the local governments and their network. And they have conferences every year to increase the knowledge and capacity of the local governments within their network. And so this is a tool for them. This is a resource. Some folks think of this as a textbook, for example. And so you need that teacher. Who's that teacher at the local level? And in some cases, it is the municipal league or the county association. Shannon mentioned we do these peer-to-peer learning exchange tours. Those are in partnership with the municipal leagues and the county association. So they invite their members to come on this tour, and then we use these materials as part of that. Again, it's a textbook, it's a curriculum, but you have to find who that teacher is. And usually it's through a network. If there are folks on the call, you might be part of one yourself and not even know it. It's about who is that trusted person, who has a trusted relationship with a local official, so that when you share information, you share a resource, it's going to be paid attention to.
I guess the one thing I would add to that is that these are organizations that have shared missions. And so, for example, a municipal league might have the mission of educating local officials. And we have the mission of educating local officials on bay-related topics. And so this helps them to meet their goals. And so it's a win-win for everybody because there's a mutual benefit to it.
Wow, great. There's a wonderful question from Marisa. Is there any research in your survey that informs if there is a change in policy development / implementation related to this increased knowledge? So, are you any signals, formal or informal, story-based, that this has really made a difference?
So in terms of the survey, the first year we did it was in 2022. And we are redoing that survey this spring. So we have yet to measure any change because we have a baseline, not the ability to measure change yet. I certainly hope we will measure a change. Hard to say. We do have a really dispersed model with these materials. So we don't ask people to report back how they use them or what the impact of it was. And so because of that dispersed model, we don't have a great feedback loop right now for how these materials are being used. It's more me emailing somebody, hey, I heard you use these. Can you tell us what happened?
Right.
I would say we have, a little bit of kind of anecdotal information. Shannon mentioned that Washington Metropolitan Council of Governments, they have a brand new agriculture committee, and that agricultural committee has used that module, understanding and supporting your agricultural allies. And they're doing some, I think, really great work in the DC area, connecting food access and sustainable production of food that I think is a really great positive outcome. Can I say it's come from the modules? Hard to say, but they do use them as some of their onboarding materials for those folks. And then I know in Delaware, sharing those resources has led to some folks being in touch with DNREC about accessing state funding for green infrastructure. So, there's some anecdotes of some positive feedback loops, but because it's this dispersed model where we're trying to support and empower hundreds of people, thousands of people across the watershed that are doing this work, we don't have a great way to sort of track that behavior change as a result of the product.
We have, however, talked about it a lot.
Yes.
And I remember when I was chair, we used to talk about how to do how to measure the effectiveness of this. It is part of our charge to be able to evaluate the knowledge base of local government officials, and to evaluate any change that we can create through education. And we have tried to approach that through the overall survey. And just so you all know, we have to be super, super careful when we're asking people for questions about knowledge, because we have to go through review committees on sociological experimentation. And so we had talked about putting the pre-tests and post-tests into the actual modules, and made a decision not to do that, partly because of that. However, that is something that I think over time we would like to look at more, because it is important. It is part of our charge. Just there are a lot of challenges with getting that kind of information, with elected officials coming and going as well, because they might only be there for a couple of years and then they leave. So if anyone has any suggestions for how we might want to do that, we definitely would love to hear them, and maybe we can incorporate them into the next version of our efforts.
Oh, great. Yeah, thank you. And be careful what you ask for.
Yeah, we've got a lot of good scientists in the room. Now, this is the right group to ask.
Yeah. I would say, let me go ahead and sort of combine two questions, because it's a little bit, it's a little bit of a different direction. So John Graff is asking, how would you suggest someone find their local elected officials, and on what scale did you work with the officials? So I think in there might be, if you're an individual and you want to use these materials to engage your local official in conversation, how do you find one at the appropriate scale that the materials are particularly useful? So is it across all these scales, neighborhood, town, county? Is the information applicable? You know, how, if you're an individual, how do you go about initiating a conversation and you're utilizing the materials in that way?
So if you're an individual and you're not an elected official, we have the whole public process in government where you can give input to your elected officials on the decisions that they're making and why they're making them. And so if you pay attention to, either through your papers or through videos or however it is that your local government is putting out information about the kinds of decisions that they're making, and if you notice, for example, that there's someone who seems to be spouting misinformation about a particular topic, then one of the things that you could do is pull this information down and try to schedule a meeting with them to talk to them about it, or to bring it to a public meeting. This information is designed to educate local elected officials, and it's not designed to say who in particular has to be the one to do it. And it's also something that citizens can use for their own education. We had a specific audience in mind as far as who we were trying to serve, but that's not limiting.
That's thanks, Shannon. That's a great answer. Laura, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I'll add, if you don't know who your local elected officials are, you should do that. You should just find out, use Google to figure out who your local elected officials are at your, city or municipal level, at your county level. Attend a public meeting, go in person and just listen, hear what they're talking about, hear what their priorities are. One of the post-pandemic benefits is that a lot of those are virtual. So you can, join from home, or you can watch a recording later. So that's number one, just learn about your local government and your local elected officials and what's happening. Number two, I would say, to really create meaningful change at the local level, there needs to be a strong relationship. So either you're going to build a relationship with your local elected officials, or find someone in your network who maybe already has a strong relationship with the local elected officials in your community. And then number three, use that trusted relationship that you've either built or that you've identified with a common someone in common, and then use these materials as sort of, that would be that third piece, I would say.
Oh, or if you're running for office, you can use these materials to educate yourself, and then you can become an ally for the Bay Program.
There you go.
Oh, great. It was a great series of steps. Let me combine something that was submitted in advance with Fred Dobbs' comment, actually, because one of the questions was, what audiences beyond elected officials have found the library useful. For example, residents, public works, appointed educators. And Fred in the chat from being an educator says, while you designed it for local officials, I think it also holds pedagogical tools useful to educators. For example, I teach a course in aquatic pollution at Old Dominion University, and I would use the website, especially Module 11, I just took a look, as supplementary reading and probably steal some of the slides. So was that, have you seen that use by other audiences other than, you know, your intended target audience?
I know it has been used, but we don't track it. So I don't have, you know, I focus my tracking on the local elected side. But yeah, I know folks have used it in educational settings, just anecdotally. Shannon, have you heard of other stories?
I haven't, but I'm happy to hear about this.
An application I would love to see for any teachers on the call. You know, if I was in high school or in college and it was in a sort of environmental policy class, let's say, how cool would it be to assign students to take these materials and go to their local elected officials with them, to give those students practice using them, you know, with local elected officials directly. I think that would be a really neat and exciting assignment for a high school or a college student. And I think it'd be really well received by local elected officials. They love to meet with high schoolers in their community. That's an easy yes for an elected official to meet with a high schooler. So I think that would be such a cool assignment if there would be someone out there willing to do it.
I hope, Fred, you're still listening. And all the other 6 people gave him a thumbs up on that question. That's wonderful. What have you gotten any feedback on additional topics needed in the future? Anything you haven't covered?
We did 1 round of them, the first 7, and then we did 4 additional. So we filled some of those gaps with this 4 additional ones. We could have 100 of these, right? But then it's maybe too unwieldy. So I think there's a balance there. I don't know, Shannon, are there topics you feel like we've missed?
No, I think the ones that were really important to me that we focused on the year that I was the chair were the environmental justice and equity issue and the climate issue. And it was in the context of that we decided to make those cross-cutting across the other topics. You could also have one just specifically for each of those topics, and I think it would be well received.
Oh, interesting. Was it were the cross-cutting topics, was it relatively, I don't want to say it's never easy, isn't the right word, but could you kind of easily weave those across all the topics? Was it sort of clear how that?
No, it's very clear. For example, if you're talking about stormwater, you're talking about flooding. You're talking about people bearing a disproportionate amount of the burden of climate change, depending on where they live. Any of these issues has those kinds of implications to it, and it doesn't take very long to start talking about them. And I think the more we dug into it, the more we found, which I think is typically true for the topics of environmental justice and equity and climate anyway. But no, there's obvious tie-ins.
Great. Okay. What about let me ask you this, as we kind of go to close, because I usually ask you what you want to leave with, but both of you have worked so deeply in this area and been so involved in the development and use of the materials. And I didn't ask you this ahead of time, so my apologies, but what would have been your biggest surprise in watching them get implemented, or trying to get them into the right hands?
I think for me, you know, we wanted to make these things tailorable to whatever purpose people wanted to use them for, but to actually see how they're using them and the kind of the diversity of the ways that they've been using them. That's kind of my favorite part because because I think that that's oftentimes missing in a toolkit, which is how can I take this and turn this into my own thing so I can own it and use it for my own purposes. And it's just been kind of fun to see people doing
that. I was so impressed that people can do that. Where did that idea come from? Because that was a huge thing for me. I never considered that, about how that would just really kind of accelerate their use in the world, the ability for people to make them their own. So how did that come up?
I remember talking about it. I don't remember where it came up. Do you, Laura?
I think it came from those two focus groups and interviews and reports that were done in 2015 and 2017. They talked about how important a trusted messenger is. That's sort of like social science 101, right? And you have to be thoughtful about when you are using certain logos with local government. So for example, if a local government sees something with an EPA logo on the materials, they might have a reaction to that.
They automatically love it.
Yes, of course, Shannon. And so when we were conceptualizing this project, not having EPA branding on it felt important. And then as we were developing it, we heard from our municipal leagues, we heard from our county associations, hey, we have this newly elected officials training. We might be able to incorporate these materials into it, but that's all branded with our stuff. And so that's sort of where this idea came about having non-branded materials that can be customized, to your colors, your logo, your messaging. And then, every local government is different. There's no one size fits all. So we couldn't just put PDFs out into the world. These needed to be editable. They needed to be, I want to pull this slide. I want to do this with it. And I'll agree with Shannon that the creativity of ways people are using it has sort of blown me out of the water. Next month, Virginia Municipal League is publishing a big article on the Chesapeake Bay, and they're using some of the infographics from the website in their printed magazine that's going to all the elected officials in Virginia. So I would have not thought to use an infographic in a printed magazine, but they did. So that's what that's how it's being used there.
Wow. So Laura, that's been your biggest surprise too, is just the diversity.
Yeah.
I
and
will
how popular the editable, brand it with your own logo piece has been.
Yeah, well, I can tell you that people have had lots of ideas about how to expand it. So Morel King said, with some tweaking, this could be useful for elected officials at the state and congressional level as well, or at least help frame some introductory conversations with them. Although their influence is at the state or federal level, their primary interest in constituency is at the local level. And then Bob Esty says, I work with both local officials and with the Scouts. I'm thinking of using this for the Scouts since conservation is one of the core values we try to instill. So now you're going to Congress and the Scouts and higher education, which is great. So I will just ask you any, as we close up, and thank you very, very much. I can't wait to really be on the website and playing around in there. Any just parting thoughts you want to make sure people leave with? And I'll ask you, Laura, first, and then Shannon to close us out.
Yeah, I'll say, we're here to help. So don't be afraid to shoot me an email about the materials or how you could use them or how others have used them. Or if you're interested in, tailoring them for your audiences, we have suggestions on, where you can find case studies from your community, where you can find photographs to add to the website. So we're here to help if we can in any way.
Great.
And I would just add to that, give us your feedback because we want to hear from you. Did it work? Did it not work? What's missing? What do you need? Because that's what our organizations are here to do.
Well, let me thank you once again. Thanks everyone for asking just wonderful questions and a wonderful conversation. And it might be more of springtime when we meet again on Wednesday, April 17th. So thank you. Thank you, Shannon and Laura.